So I wanted to talk about a part of a koan, not the koan itself, but the verse for the koan, which I happen to have reviewed just before the riots in LA, riots, the demonstrations, because they were peaceful until they got incited. Um, and here in Los Angeles, and those of you who know Los Angeles is just it's this huge sprawl. So my friends have called from all over asking, "Oh, are you okay? Are you in the middle of a war zone?" And I'm like, "No, I I I do live just outside of downtown Los Angeles, which is where the demonstrations were taking place, and they were outside the detention center where the ICE agents were detaining people, and the Buddhist temple where I both practice and teach Japanese tea ceremony is only about 2 blocks away from there. So I have driven through that area, and without much difficulty. The demonstrators were there, but it wasn't until um, the National Guard and the Marines arrived that they shut everything down, and it became a little bit more difficult. Um, and I'm sure that there were agitators on both sides, because the truth is always two several different stories that come together. But just before that that event those events started happening, um, I read this verse, and it's in case 33 of the Gateless Gate, the Mumonkan, and it's the koan is that it's attached to is a monk called Baso in all earnestness asked, "What is Buddha?" And Baso replied, "No mind, no Buddha." And interestingly enough, 2 cases before, in case 30, the same teacher, Baso, says the very mind is Buddha. So there's this, you know, it sounds like it's an apparent contradiction, although it really isn't. But the verse that caught my attention at the time of the demonstrations was very spoke to me, because my my question and questions from some of the people I practice with is, how do we respond, in times like these? How do we respond? Some people have this very, activist response, and some people have this wanting to, you know, peace and quiet response. They don't want all this disruption, and other people just want to get in there and and take it on. So this verse, I thought was very instructive, at least for me. So the verse reads, "If you meet a swordsman, you may present a sword. You should not offer a poem unless you meet a poet. When you speak to others, say only 3/4 of it. You should never give away the remaining part." So that's just like, okay, that's for me, that was helpful. It was like, okay, so if you meet a swordsman, you present a sword, meaning that you're presenting on equal ground, that I'm just as skilled as you are. That necessarily doesn't necessarily mean we have to fight, but you've got your sword out, here's mine. Um, and you should not offer a poem unless you meet a poet. So for me, that's saying trying to trying to counter a reaction by in some way, um, may not always work. Sometimes it does, but may not always work. So you have to meet the situation with what the situation calls for. If the situation calls for poetry, by all means, uh, present your poetry. If it calls for a sword, then present your sword. And so then I got down to the reality. If I meet a Los Angeles police officer, or if I meet a National Guardsman, or if I meet a Marine who's been deployed in Los Angeles, um, what do I do? That's the and that's where this is where all these, 1,000-year-old koans, where the rubber hits the road, because it's really not about all these old dead guys and what they had to say. It's about how you're going to use this practice right here, right now, in the situation that you're in. Um, that's the only place this practice works. It doesn't work anyplace else, or any other time, or in any other way. Um, And the certainly with these types of demonstrations, it's very nuanced in many cases. Some people, the conspiracy theory is that um, our current, president was just trying to incite violence by sending these these violent people in, and to put the fear of Trump into the demonstrators. Um, and but despite the every attempt for the demonstrators to be peaceful. So when I drove through the demonstrators, um, they were orderly. They were on the sidewalk. They were not in the middle of the street. And even, I drove up to the intersection. It was Alameda. I can't remember the name of the cross street, and the light was red. I mean, light was like turned red as I got there, and there were a bunch of demonstrators that were about to cross the street. They waited for the light, and so this was a very orderly group of people, and certainly as their light turned green and they were crossing the street, they're flashing their signs in my window, and as they're making their way across the street, but they got out of the way of the traffic, when the light turned green, and I, continued home. Um, so this idea that, they were shutting everything down, that was certainly not apparent with what I saw. Now that may have happened later, but or in some other place. So, but that was not my wisdom. So if encountering, these situations, one has to read the room, as they say. What is really happening? Um, and I've always been a little skeptical. So when I hear things on the news, and they certainly, I don't know if anybody's seen the comedian Josh Johnson. I think he's very funny, and he was talking about his take on it. He he was calling his friends in L.A. because according to the news, everyone in L.A. was dead. And the whole city was on fire, and it was burning down, but that really was not the case. So to really look at the situation as what it is, it does require some level of objectivity, to the ability to take a step back, take a breath, not react, and say, what's really going on here? And then to respond. There's another, I think it's case I may have this, don't quote me, because I can't run over and get my books right now. I think it's case 40 in the Blue Cliff Record. The teacher says that Zazen, or the teaching of the Buddhas are one teaching in response. So, and I think that's really saying, you look at the situation as it is, and you respond according to what that situation is, and not as you want it to be or want to make it, or was told by social media and the news that it was the situation. Assess it, experience it directly for yourself, and then, um, meet that situation with what it calls for. Um, if a sword is being presented, um, present a sword, if indeed that's what, because that presentation of the sword, those of you who ever, I've never studied fencing, but as from what little I know about fencing, is that it's like, I guess more closer to ours would be a duel. You walk 10 paces apart, but there are rules about how that happens. It's set up so that there's a fair fight. Same thing with fencing, that one presents a sword, the other presents a sword, they cross swords, and then they begin to fight. So in a situation where that fight is not quite so, um, equal or fair, or where the rules are clear, how then do we meet that situation? And it doesn't have to be, I'm talking about, certainly this demonstration has raised this question up in my mind, recently, but this happens all the time. Um, we don't always know what people's intents or motivations are. Um, and how do we meet them? And our practices, and this is the gift of those of you who haven't done koan study. Koan study is really about putting yourself in all these many different situations and meeting those situations where they are in reality, bringing those situations into your reality and your direct experience, and responding to those situations directly. Um, and oftentimes, there's not a lot of information in the koan about the situation. That's why they sound so weird and somewhat ridiculous. But how the same thing happens in life. When we meet people, we don't have a lot of information about them or their situation or their background or why they're there, what their motivations are. And if we're looking at these ICE agents or National Guards, guards people. I don't know if they're all men or not, or the Marines. Um, we don't know them. I don't know them individually. I don't know what their motivation is. I have some vague idea of what their job description is, and what their purpose in that situation is. Um, but all those things are filtered through a lot of information that isn't apparent, that isn't readily available. Same thing happens with koans. There's not a lot of information in those koans. You're just handed this line and say, pass this. Same thing in life. You're handed, an encounter, and that's the challenge. Pass this. Take care of this. And how do we do that? How do we, um, especially as practitioners, and certainly, Zen is it's just weird. It's just weird practice because we want to. If you're outside looking in, it's a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing. It looks very passive, and everyone is breathing, hopefully, while they're on the cushion, and so it looks very peaceful and calm. And so some people say, "Ah, this looks tranquil. I want some peace and calm in my life." And so, um, you come to practice to find that peace and calm. But you will very quickly, if you stick with it, discover that peace and calm it's achieved it and not quite a um not the way you may think. Most people want peace and calm by getting rid of uh dissonance and stress. Excuse me. um and Zen kind of does the opposite. It brings you into reality just as it is. And you're sitting with that reality just as it is. And you're becoming, what's the right one? Serene, if you will, with reality just as it is. So you do get to that peace and calm, but in a counterintuitive way. So that's the challenge uh, with um, with this practice. It's not what people imagine. We're not. We haven't built up these force fields that keep everything out. Would be nice sometimes, but that's not what this practice is about. This practice is about being in reality, just as it is, being with the swordsman, being with the poet, being with the demonstrators, the and understanding what they're demonstrating is. It's about people who are working, have families, have kids, have parents, um, that are being dragged out, detained, deported, and the cat what they're in a category, that category of of illegal. And then I look at the policemen. They have families, and kids, and parents, and and all those other relatives, but they're in that category of being police, National Guardsmen, Marines, um, the demonstrators category. So we tend to box people in to those convenient little categories and say, okay, so police have to stop the demonstrators. And if the police can't do it, the National Guardsmen step in. National Guardsmen get assistance from the Marines. So that's where the opposition is. That's where it looks to be. But are they really in opposition if we really took a look at who people really are with all of their filters, all of the unknowns? If they were known, what would they be? And the only source of that information is within ourselves, because that's what we bring to everyday life. That's what we bring to the koan. So we know that we're not, if you know yourself well enough, you don't fit into those categories easily. Um, you may participate in a particular group, but you're not like everybody else that's in the group. Because there'll be people in that same group that'll be like, yeah, stop this by any means necessary. And the other people are like, no, we need to do this in a different way. It's got to be peaceful and nonviolent. Uh, so all those subtleties and the infinite number of samenesses and differences are all a part of this oneness, because this oneness does not manifest as sameness. Every single individual, every single piece, every reason, intent, motivation for every person is different. And to not get sucked in to the inflammatory headlines, because I do believe that there's both good and bad in all aspects of every part of what goes on in any demonstration and in everyday life. So meeting people or meeting situations where they are as they are is what this teaching is all about, what this sitting is all about. Zazen gives us the ability to take that backward step and take a pause and take a breath or 10 or 100, whatever it takes to really take in and be with the situation, the individuals, all the subtle nuances that are constantly in play, and to respond appropriately and effectively, because the appropriate and effective response may not be to actually use the swords or the guns. It also may not be completely passive nonviolence. It may be something in between or a combination of all of those things. Um, I'm old enough to remember the the more psychological battle between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I mean, those were two very, very, very important characters in the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King stood for peaceful nonviolence. Malcolm X was like, by any means necessary, we need to be treated fairly. So, and you know, which, and it was set up as this dichotomy, as if these two were opposing ways of dealing with things, but they really weren't. The subtleties in all of those were very apparent to those of us who were in the middle of all that and trying to see our way through it. Uh, we needed both, um, and both were employed to a certain extent. And I think that's what happens in everyday life. So with koan study, you do the same thing. You plug yourself into these situations with all of their unknowns, and you plug yourself into all sides of that. It's usually a dialogue, between two or three people. And in this uh, case, it's a teacher talking to a student, and giving an answer that was completely different from the answer he gave to a previous student. And but both students were were greatly affected by the answers they got. So this teacher was skillful enough to read the room, to respond to that particular student, that particular situation in a way that moved it into a better place, moved it toward, greater enlightenment. Uh, but the answers were different. Uh, in the first answer, the very mind is a Buddha. When asked the question, "What is Buddha?" The second answer, what is Buddha, is no mind, no Buddha. So certainly you can parse that out philosophically and come to some conclusion about why these answers are the same. But I think it's much more direct than that. It's like, what does that person who is sitting right in front of me, what does the situation that is right in front of me really need? What what will help them? What will heal them? Because that's the vow we take, to save all sentient beings. Um, Saving is a weird word because what are we saving them from? Um, I don't know. Your chants tend to be. I was just looking at them since I discovered them on the page. Is that worded differently? Trying to look here. I think it is. Yeah, beings are boundless. We vow to serve. I think that's a much more accurate way because the old way, and we still do it the old way at Yokoji and at Long Beach. Sentient beings are nobles. We vow to save them. Yours says the Dharma no, that's the wrong one. Where to go? Beings are boundless. We vow to serve. So how do we serve? How do we serve this situation, this person, these people, this group, this demonstration, this army? How do we serve this situation as it is, not as we want it to be? Because certainly I want them gone. I want don't want them in my city. I don't want ICE dragging people out. I don't want any of that. But that's my hangups, my bias is how do I serve, since I'm not going to be I can't walk in and stop ICE. I can't stop the Marines. I can't stop the police. I can't, and I probably don't want to stop the demonstrators. But how do I serve? How do I use this practice to be of service in everyday situation? Um, how do I deal with these contrived dualities? Because there is no ambiguity in reality. Um, each situation, each answer, each approach may need to be different, may need to appear to be ambiguous, because that one situation over here needed it this way, and this other situation over here needed it another way. Anyway, it's always a question. So I have no answers for you. Sorry, but it's a moment by moment. These are the questions I asked. Do any questions, any comments? Um, where are all of you with any of this? And